A meeting of the budget review. No, that's the wrong thing. Oh, she just made it incorrect again. A meeting of the Substandard Living Conditions Special Committee was held Thursday, May 13th, 2021, beginning at 7:03 via teleconference. As chairman of the Substandard Living Special Committee, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of COVID-19 pandemic, and in accordance with the governor's emergency order number 12 pursuant to the executive order 2020-04, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. Please note that there's no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting, which was authorized pursuant to the governor's emergency order. However, in accordance with the emergency order, I'm confirming that we are providing public access to the meeting by telephone, with additional access possibilities by video and other electronic means. To access Zoom, please refer to the agenda on the city's website for the meeting link. To join via phone, dial 1-929-205-6099. The meeting ID is 815-1240-7430, and passcode is 299381. The public may also view this meeting via channel 16. We previously gave notice to the public of the necessary information for assessing the meeting through public postings. Instructions have also been provided on the City of Nashua's website at nashuanh.gov and publicly noticed at City Hall and Nashua Public Library. If anyone has a problem assessing the meeting via phone or channel 16, please call 603-821-2049 and they will help you connect. In the event the public is unable to access the meeting via the methods mentioned above, the meeting will be adjourned and rescheduled. Please note that all votes that are taken during the meeting shall be done by roll call. Let's start the meeting by taking the roll call attendance. When each member states their presence, please also state whether there's anyone in the room with you during this meeting, which is required under the right to know law. Alderman Jettie, will you call the roll for us, please?
Yes, Madam Chairman. Alderman Jan Schmidt.
I am here and alone in the room.
Alderman Ernest Jettie is here alone, and I can hear the proceedings. Alderman Thomas Lopez.
I haven't heard from him. He doesn't appear to be joining us tonight.
Alderwoman Elizabeth Liu.
I'm here, I can hear you, and I'm alone.
And Alderman Skip Cleaver.
I do not believe he'll be joining us tonight.
So we have 3 in attendance and 2 absences.
Thanks very much. Well, I was really hoping that Alderman Lopez was going to be here because he had an idea that we should actually provide some information to the people of Nashua who are looking for rent assistance. What he was looking at, I'm sorry? Oh, I just heard something else. He was looking at something that was statewide, and I don't think that that's anything that we could interfere with. For information about assistance with your housing, you can go to gopher, GOFERR.nh.gov. And under there, you can also go to the Southern New Hampshire Services, reaching them at 603-668-8010. If you don't have access to a computer, there's also the library, which is open and making their computers available at 10, 12, 2, and 4. You get 90 minutes on it, and you do have to schedule ahead of time. So you just give them a call. Aside from that, what I was thinking was, first I'd like to ask if anyone has any ideas of what we should discuss tonight or in the future here. Alderwoman Liu?
No, I don't have any thoughts, and that's why I was smiling, because I felt a little sheepish about it. This substandard living conditions has seemed to subside or is not on the forefront in our city at this time. So I don't have any suggestions of, anything that needs to be done at this time.
Alderman Jettie?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, Alderwoman Liu brings up a good point, something that I've, thought about when I was assigned to this committee. I looked at the history of the committee, and if I'm correct, the committee was originally established because it was established as an ad hoc committee, not a standing committee. And the reason for its establishment was that there were, there was a complex, I don't know if that's the right word, but facility or whatever in your ward that had gained some notoriety, I think, on national television. And so the alderman at the time felt it necessary or advisable to look into that situation. So they formed this ad hoc committee, and I think they were looking at, and when we talk about substandard housing, they were particularly looking at so-called rooming houses that provided shelter to people, or living quarters to people. Basically just a one room. And there were some abuses that were alleged, probably, borne out to be true, in fact. And so this committee was formed to look into those, investigate whether or not those allegations were true and what could be done about it. I think since then, the city has pretty much got a pretty good handle on those facilities, and the code enforcement people have done a pretty good job about bringing them into compliance with the laws. So I it's probably more appropriate when we have a full committee to discuss this, but I'm wondering, under the circumstances, whether or not the reason for this ad hoc committee having been created, no longer exists. I know that Alderman Lopez, to his credit, has identified issues that he felt that we should address, but I'm not. I can't remember specifically the ordinance provision that provides for the creation of our committee, but when I last looked at it, I think we're kind of straying beyond
Mhm.
the purpose of the committee, and I'm wondering whether or not the committee should continue to exist. A lot of the issues that Alderman Lopez has identified, are probably within the realm of one of the standing committees. I can't remember which one right now, but I knew at one time. So I think when we have a full committee, when Alderman Lopez and Alderman Cleaver can join us.
I am here.
Oh, welcome.
Could you make a note that he joined us at 7:08?
Yes, let the record show that Alderman Lopez has arrived at 7:08.
Thank you.
So I don't know how much you've heard about what I've said, Alderman Lopez, but
I hear it and I understand where it comes from. I think I would say that I wasn't just one of the original members of the Substandard Living Conditions Committee. I was somebody that the organizing members sought out prior to my position on the Board of Aldermen because of my perspective on it and my connections with the community. And I think I would suggest that it is not fair to blame the two facilities that were identified as specifically problematic. I will say it's fair that one of them made an extremely poor business decision in having a documentary crew come in and try to do a dramatic rescue kind of a scenario and expose a lot more than even they appeared to know what was going on. But I would suggest that the city's actual investment in that was because the city was over reliant on those facilities. The city was utilizing them as an alternative to emergency housing placement as a sort of a cost cutting measure. I would not argue that we are doing anything differently now. I would say we probably have reduced the department's budget that was responsible for that. But I think that played a major factor in the city's role and complicity in that was not just that it was happening in Nashua, but that Nashua was actively paying those facilities to care for people while placing them into conditions that were potentially human rights violations. And these are a very vulnerable population. I don't want any credit for discovering the obvious. A lot of the conditions that contributed to that situation and the public relations that it resulted in are still very much present today, if not more prolific in different ways. Pointing out, on this committee that we have a landlord who local nonprofits are refusing to give vouchers to during a housing crisis because they have a habit of taking that money and allegedly using it to bring people in and obtain their security deposits, but then exposing them to bed bugs and then not communicating to them that those bed bugs were a known issue and there not being anybody to advocate for it. That was something our committee did identify. And to be blunt, like a year later, not much progress was made. The front of that building fell off, and that created another public relations issue. One of the facilities that we identified that wasn't part of the more overt like documentation, but one of the facilities we had identified previously as problematic in terms of the amount of resources and money that it had available to help the population that it was serving, had a fire alarm go off and lost occupancy of the entire building because of the flooding and the resulting damage. So I get what Alderman Jetty is saying. I would just caution that regardless of where we do it as aldermen, we need to be looking at these issues proactively rather than trying to do performative measures and say, well, we created a special committee to look into this because we were deeply concerned at the things that have come to light when they're known. They're things that we contribute to and participate to as a city in our governance decisions and our fiscal policy. And we more often than not weigh with our budgetary decisions on the side of the people who can advocate for themselves, not the people who are transitional. We can't identify what their fixed address is. We can't identify whose constituents they are, who they're voting for, what their affiliation is. We can hear more easily from businesses than we can people who are afraid of losing their housing because they're bringing concerns forward. I think the credit we would want to give is to the people who did step forward when we gave them that opportunity and said, who's had concerns with this place, or who's has had experiences with groundwater, constantly showing up in their tubs, or leaky roofs, or heat that isn't being fixed. That takes guts, that takes courage. And we've had residents come forward. Recently, we've had a little bit of a less regular meeting schedule. So I don't know that it's as easy for people to be told that we'll be having the Substandard Living Conditions Committee meeting, this month. So you can come and talk to you about your concerns there, and maybe we can try to figure out some solutions. And I don't know that we've really had the same kind of oversight, especially following COVID-19, where most of our community interaction and public constituency has had to be remote over, telecommunication, with preference to people who have access to internet and computers and that kind of time. I would say that we're probably in some ways straying outside the original purpose of this committee, insofar as that committee was trying to address the tip of the iceberg and not necessarily the structural issues that contributed to it. when I took over the committee and chaired it myself, I was attempting to enhance the community departments and the relationships that we had to address substandard living conditions so that we don't get to that point again. But I think I see Alderman Jetty's point very clearly that if we are going to continue addressing those conditions, we need to, as a committee, look at exactly what we are looking at and what we're trying to accomplish. And having a special committee with the onus of just solving that one problem is going to forever haunt us, because if we're not a committee that's meeting because we're committed to making sure that there is equitable housing citywide, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of gender identity, regardless of socioeconomic status. If our committee's stated purpose isn't everybody has a right to have a decent place to live, and people who are paying to occupy those places and to rent are afforded certain rights that national we're committed to protecting. That's not our mission, then that's not what we're going to do. So I think whether or not it continues as the Substandard Living Conditions Committee or not, the issues that are underlying haven't gone away and won't go away ever, unless we really take a systems-based approach to it and create a mechanism for accountability and reporting that constituents can come forward and say, I've had these experiences, this is a pattern. And our city departments can say, we have experience and resources with that. Let's work with landlords. Like, I don't think that's what this committee really is. I think we probably have to have a discussion about creating something different, and it would probably be beneficial in a lot of different ways.
So if I could respond, Madam Chairman. So I think maybe what we ought to do is revisit the purpose of the committee. Maybe redefine its purpose, and maybe propose legislation to make a committee perhaps a standing committee to I don't know, really not. I'm not sure exactly what we would, call it, equitable housing committee, or, some other name, because I think we've kind of strayed from the original purpose of this ad hoc committee, but I think Alderman Lopez, correctly points out that there are problems regarding housing in the city that, that we certainly don't want to, pretend that we've solved anything, or that they've gone away, and that those other problems don't exist. But maybe we need, a different focus, and make it a standing committee instead of, what is currently an ad hoc committee.
If I may, I know that this was originally begun to deal with a specific problem, and as I think it was called Hotel Hell was the name of that show that showed my neighbors down the street treating their folks really badly all the way around, bed bugs, and it was disgusting. And the original intent was to deal with substandard housing and to create a new law that would deal with that. And I know they did come up with something. As far as I remember, there was an opportunity to fine landlords that had been found to not following the law and making sure that it was safe and clean. And talking with Heidi Peak, Kukula, she tells me that they prefer to stay in good stead with landlords and not to punish them, but to ask them to behave better. And I don't know if it's working. I really don't. I haven't heard anything from anybody. No one has contacted me about wanting to come before our committee. And I think that probably says we're not going to hear from the people that need to tell us anything. We also know that code enforcement now has a database of all landlords. That helps somewhat. I think the goal, their intent, as stated to landlords, is to make sure that they can be reached in case of any problems. But I also know that there are other issues that landlords had to be contacted and were not coming forward. So this is good in both ways, such as that. But I don't think there's any more legislation that can come out of substandard housing special committee. I honestly can't see what we can put into law in the city to make sure that all of our rentals are clean and safe, dry, without mold. We have the laws in place. We simply have to have someone come forward to tell us that they're not being followed. As far as this committee, if we're not having anybody come forward to tell us that they're living in substandard housing and it needs help, I'm not sure we can do anything. So maybe we do need a different direction. Maybe we do need to look at all of the rental housing in the city. Maybe we need to, well, we've already talked to the departments to find out what they would like, and we haven't had any of them tell us they need more from us. So I'm stuck in that position of not knowing where to take this. But I do know that we're not getting anywhere just in us talking to each other.
I have some context to add.
Please.
The legislation that we were looking at, or that we created, was basically because the code enforcement department didn't have the ability to force or compel action on issues that were found until the landlord was brought to court. And more often than not, they would get repeated citations over and over again up until the week of the court date, and then the issues would be resolved, meaning that the city of Nashville couldn't continue the case. So we created a mechanism where an escalating level of warnings could potentially, create shorter term impact on the landlords, and then the incentive for them to actually take action quickly. So that was the legislation that passed. Adding the creating a list of landlords, period, for use in emergencies such as fire and structural damage or anything that dislocates people. That's not exactly an accomplishment. That's a minimum standard, is just straight up knowing who we have. But there are several areas where our city departments and as budget and individuals with oversight over fiscal policy, we should be looking at making sure that the city staff have the ability to track and report some types of housing challenges that might impact citizens' quality of life. The most obvious being the bed bug issue, but parasites in general, there's no way for a person who is purchasing or renting a property to find out any history that's happened to that. And there's no obligation on the part of the landlord to disclose things like, yeah, there were bed bugs that were treated here a few weeks ago, months ago, whatever. And if it comes in, then you're not necessarily to blame. So there's clear and actionable items. I think a lot of our work got disrupted when we started to meet less regularly, and when COVID-19 took over the priorities of the public health. But this isn't a one-way street. We're not doing a charity action for our residents. Our departments, our public health department, our welfare department provides rent assistance, provides utility assistance, places people in housing. Due to our regional shortage of affordable housing or housing stock, these are things we're supposed to do based on the New Hampshire Constitution. And there's a lot of ways where we may be falling short of that. And right now we can say, well, there's no resources or there's shortcomings in the laws. But if we choose to not even look at the problems, then we're not going to solve them. So I would stress that this should be looked at in terms of what is the alderman's role. The context that I wanted to bring in originally, I got a little bit off topic there, was that the Greater Nashville Continuum of Care addresses homelessness, people who are displaced, people who are trying to progress forward into sustainable housing. And that is organized around HUD funding. It's HUD's strategy of saying, here's a finite amount of money. It's about 80% of what a community needs. So we're going to encourage you all to get together and make decisions over which one of you is not going to get the funding. So basically they have the nonprofits competing for grants while also making decisions about which one of them even get funded. That's a system of diminishing returns, and it's not uniquely beneficial to Nashua. The nonprofit organizations in Nashua carry a huge amount of the work for our city. We save the taxpayers an enormous amount of money by having multiple agencies that are versatile and able to address those needs and work collaboratively together on issues that we would have to address if we didn't have those. So the continuum of care does that, but those are nonprofits. They all have individual missions. They all have individual priorities, sometimes competing priorities, very often complementary priorities. But the work that is done there is more in coordinating them. For an aldermanic committee, we shouldn't just be looking at the legislative action we can be doing. We should also be examining fiscal priorities and making sure that our individual departments really are taking their mandates to the level that they should be, rather than being limited by their resources. If the code enforcement office has been saying for 15 plus years that they don't have the manpower to do inspections based on need, they have inspections based on complaint. There's a point where as aldermen, we're gonna have to figure out how to address that issue so that it's not just a matter of if somebody calls and complains, then we can inspect something, but until then, we can't do a thing about it. That's not keeping buildings safe, and that's not meeting the full mandate of that department. And if we have a public health department whose role, particularly with welfare guidelines, is to make sure that we're staying true to the spirit of the constitutional requirement, the New Hampshire constitutional requirement of our city, we need to make sure that is taking place, because a lot of legislation that we haven't made is being instead managed by departments, and the departments may or may not always be in complete alignment with what our city's needs are.
Right now, the health department will not enter without notifying. They will not do that. And I believe that that's probably the law, that you cannot enter an apartment without notifying the landlord.
Is that related to what I was saying?
I'm sorry?
Is that in reference to what I was talking about? Code enforcement, building enforcement, not the health department.
Well, the health department also does all of the tours around to the various places once they hear a complaint. We were going to have Heidi Peak come and talk to us about this.
So environmental health. And when I
Yes.
talk about the health department, I'm usually referring to the welfare assistance department,
Ah,
and how we're using taxpayer funding to maybe subsidize a landlord who's providing substandard conditions, things that could trace back to us in terms of liability, because we have no ability to actually do an on-site inspection, evaluation, or anything like that. And there's no real requirement to. If somebody's taking taxpayer funds to continue their rent or to forestall eviction, I feel like we kind of should occasionally vet that and make sure that we're not giving it to the same organizations that we're going to claim that we're outraged by. Because when we had that hotel nightmare scenario, the two businesses we were talking about, one of them was not the hotel. That hotel was the one that city welfare was giving a lot of vouchers to and has resumed doing. The other one was a boarding house where there was another partnership in place, but we can't act like we're not to blame when these circumstances happen, when we're enabling that system by giving them a constant cash flow and basically recommending people who are in a desperate situation, you can move here, it'll save the taxpayers money and it's affordable, and we can put you up for a couple of weeks. And then after that, you need to figure yourself out and then be surprised when a couple months down the road, they haven't actually gotten out of that situation that we put them in. Because when you put someone into a boarding house, you're occupying their income. You may give them enough time to, get their income stabilized or find additional earned income. But if there isn't any kind of follow-up, then there isn't on from the city. There may be from nonprofits, but there's no making sure that that person gets to a point of sustainable housing. They're still where we left them because we put them in a situation where they had no choices. It was better than none, but then they're struggling to even maintain the one that we put them in. So that's
And
what
your
I mean
solution.
I
So-
think
so
there's multiple directions we should be looking at as a city. And again, not necessarily on this committee, but I think there's areas where the city's support is limited by the resources that it has available. And sometimes it's limited by the authorities that it has available too.
Yes, Alderman Jettie.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So, something that I've brought up in the past, I can't remember who was appearing before us. I think it was the code enforcement people, it may have been Director Marchand, I can't remember for sure. But I brought up the idea of, and when I became an alderman, I was surprised to find out that, this city is a complaint-driven
Yeah.
operation. That almost none of our city departments proactively, and forgive me for if there's any department that I don't mean to offend anyone or say anything that is not true, but we've heard it several times that code enforcement, for example, in particular, I know that they said for sure, and the building department as well, that they're a complaint-driven, and the police department is to some degree also. They welcome complaints, but they don't go out and really do anything proactively to enforce the laws. And it surprised me to find out that, for example, not only are our rental properties not regularly inspected, that it's only when someone complains about something that code enforcement comes out to check it out. That it's also true of our hotels. Apparently, our hotels are not regularly inspected. It's only if somebody has a complaint. So that, somebody coming in from out of town and staying in one of our hotels, they have no assurance that, that the hotel complies with our local laws. Not that they don't, but there's no assurance that they do, other than if somebody finds a complaint, finds a reason to complain, do we do anything? And I think it was said to us that the reason for that is that we can't afford. We don't have the staff to do those inspections. We can't afford to do it. So one solution to that is to require every landlord, every rental property, long-term rentals like apartments, short-term rentals like hotels, that they all, receive some kind of a license or a permit from the city.
Yep.
Which, in whatever fee would be determined that would be appropriate,
Right.
that would help fund a sufficient staff to do these inspections. And, I think the city of Manchester, requires, I think they impose a fee on every business, an annual fee on every business in Manchester. They pay some amount, I don't know what it is, what the amount is, but that helps Manchester fund, this type of program. And so when I brought it up, the the people we were talking to, I think it was from code enforcement, but I'm not sure, so I don't want to blame anyone. But they didn't seem to be very enthused. I mean, there are a lot of objections to that type of program. We're making, we're putting a burden on landlords. We're trying to encourage them to provide housing, and here we are putting a fee on them. Same thing with hotels. I guess that's one way of looking at it. But another way is that these people are not only providing a service, they're also they're also in business. They're making a profit of varying degrees, and that maybe it is appropriate for them to pay a fee to help the city finance an appropriate inspection program, so that the onus would not be upon some poor tenant who is struggling to find housing to begin with, putting the onus on that tenant to complain about a deficiency in the apartment, and then fearing that the landlord is going to try to find some reason to evict the tenant. I know it's against the law to do that, but it happens, and I'm sure tenants, especially low income, people in lower income, paying lower rents, and lower income people would be more reluctant to to complain for fear of losing a place to live altogether. So that would remove the burden from them. It would have an annual inspection that could help detect problems ahead of time. So thank you.
Alderman Lopez.
He's telling my hand is up because of this weird color combination here. Just in case anyone was wondering why I was waving a little bit there. But so to Alderman Jetty's point, we talk about how everyone has a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in this country. If you are being evicted from your apartment or your place of if you're renting a home or anything like that, if you're being evicted and you feel it's unfair, you have the right to appeal it. But the landlord is the one who gets to decide where the appeal is going to happen. We have a pretty famous example in downtown Nashua, where we have a pretty large rooming house, which is about a block away from the court. And they typically, you have to go to the court in Portsmouth because that's where they filed. So there are issues with making it a complaint-driven, people have the right to be heard scenario where there is that lack of equity. Additionally, as Alderman Jetty pointed out, the city departments weren't overly enthusiastic about joining forces in a lot of ways, to the extent where in some of the meetings where we talked about how a complaint would be received, processed, recorded, documented, it wasn't even clear where the complaint was supposed to go. It was disclosed that a lot of people might come to the building department and complain about something and then be sent to a different place where the other department doesn't have a database at all or any record keeping capability, but that the city department that they first made the complaint to, which absolutely has a database, wouldn't keep track of it either. So we can't claim to have a complaint driven process when you make it very difficult and intimidating for people to complain in the first place. I think that does speak to the issue of equity.
I can tell you that as far as where a landlord goes to court, where he files, that's a state regulation. We have tried to change it in the past and have been unable so far. That doesn't mean that I'm not going to try again.
Right, right. And I'm not blaming you at the state, you as a
no.
representative. What I'm saying is that as a city of Nashua,
I
that's
understand.
yet another area where we cannot rely on a larger authority, and our constituents can't either. If we don't address it in-house, they can't appeal to a higher authority as easily.
So as a committee, we could actually say that we recommend that the city license any rental unit. Yes. We can say that that money collected in the licensure goes to an inspector's fees, whatever, part-time, whatever we have, and that we make sure that there's a database with all of this information, and that that is consulted before any money is given to a landlord for temporary housing. Does that sound like what we've come up with so far?
I would potentially add that it might be a good idea to create a license structure where it's scaled to the tax value of the property, because larger larger facilities shouldn't be paying the same amount as smaller ones, and
Fair
smaller ones
enough.
should be paying the same as largers.
Per
And some
unit?
of the higher end ones, but not even just per unit, because I think some of the higher end ones can probably take the tax load a little bit more comfortably, where the lower end ones can't necessarily afford that. And we might be charging them out of the same pot of money that they would keep the front of their building from falling off, for example. So if somebody is going to contribute to the escalating amount of money that our support programs have to pay, like the housing authority and that, in order to get vouchers, if they're going to contribute to inflating the cost of housing, of rental housing, then they should contribute to the ability to make sure that it's quality.
So licensing once a year,
Thank you.
and any suggestions for the amount the license should cost?
I think it should be scaled to the assessed property value.
$20 a year, 50, 5, Alderman Jettie?
So I think, I'm thinking that perhaps we're getting too far ahead of ourselves. I think that, we ought to look at, I think the place to start would be for, I'd be willing to work on this and appreciate any other help anybody else would like to provide.
I'm
But
volunteering.
looking into what other, I mean, this is not a unique problem, so we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Let's look at what other cities, what other, places, I think, we ought to find out if any other city in New Hampshire has done something similar. I
Manchester
suspect-
does, just to let you know.
I thought Manchester did, but I'm not sure about that. Yes,
Yeah.
okay. So let's look at what they are doing. And that's encouraging, because they must have gotten beyond that. The problem we keep running into is that, we can't do anything the state doesn't let us do. And so if Manchester's doing it, they must have
Yep.
gotten through that problem. Finding out what, whether there are any other cities that have done this in New Hampshire, and what they charge, and, kind of, and then, come back, with, to this committee, with what we find out, and then we can, see where we want to go from there.
Would you be willing to do some research for us, Alderman Jettie?
I would be, yeah.
That would be awesome. Thank you. The big cities, Keene, Portsmouth, Manchester, Concord, they'd be the ones that we'd be looking at, because they're the ones that have the most rental units, probably.
Mm. And perhaps the municipal association would,
Oh,
would,
yes,
yeah,
that is an excellent idea.
we're members and we don't take full advantage of our membership, I don't think. So maybe we could, maybe they could help us.
So you would be asking, is it legal, and can we license and inspect yearly on that license? That might be a question, because it might be an intrusion. I don't know. That's one thing that I had heard. The reason that that the health department, the code department does not go unless there's a complaint, was because they didn't feel that they had the right to go into something someone else owns.
Well, I think that stems from, if you suspect that the law is being violated, you need, before you can enter the apartment, you need some probable cause.
Ah, yes,
You probably need a court warrant, uh, to allow you to enter. But if, the way that, this other program, the way that other program gets around that is that you require an annual, permit. And in order to get the permit, you have to submit to an inspection. So if you don't allow people in to inspect, you don't get the permit, so you can't rent the apartment. That's how I think that's how they get around that.
that sounds good. That sounds good. Alderman Lopez, did you?
Maybe tying it to recertification for occupancy following an eviction, because number one, there'd be that whole grandfather thing. People who have tenants in there right now, maybe they don't have to necessarily do anything right now as long as those tenants stay there, and that's an incentive for the landlords to ensure that the tenant is happy with where they are.
That's
But
an
if there's
excellent thought.
nobody in the apartment, then having code enforcement inspect it, understand exactly what they're planning to do with it, and make sure that the next people in line are moving into a place that's legitimate. That's kind of like getting at it before the residents are investing their money too.
Good, very good. I think we see something forward. Yes, Alderwoman Liu.
Thank you. A couple things, but Alderman Lopez, I didn't quite understand the point you were just making about recertify before, if it's a vacant unit. How would the city know it's a vacant unit? Are you referring to the units that we actually have welfare funds being used to rent?
Indirectly. So tying city support to things is tricky. We have the liability in a very indirect way of contributing to a situation that we don't want to. But at the same time, if we disincentivize working with the city, we've created another problem where now we're forced to work with a smaller group of people that we don't have as much ability to influence. So I didn't mean tying it specifically to public supported programs. I would want to apply this to a scenario that was relevant to everybody so that we don't create a separate class or expectation. When I say certify for occupancy, we could require landlords to advise us if a tenant has been evicted, and then we would go and inspect before they're allowed to move anybody else in. That may address a lot of problems that you run into in the eviction and whatever scenario, because sometimes someone's being evicted because the tenant or the landlord just wants to move somebody else in that they prefer or like more, and that's fine. It's their place and their location and everything, but it's not not fair to evict somebody under false pretenses because you want a more desirable tenant in. So if there's going to be an evaluation done afterwards, it's a little more difficult to be egregious with that, like just make things up. And then likewise, if you're going to evict somebody because you didn't maintain the unit that they're staying in and they're making noise over it, you're not going to escape the problem by doing that. You're just going to have the city come and inspect it anyway. True.
Okay. Thank you. So I just wanted to say that I love the idea of looking at this in a more systematic way and seeing if we can make have some effect on increasing the equity in housing in Nashua. So I'm really happy that this meeting took a turn this way. I think pricing the license might depend on how many units there are in the city, and that would be a factor in how much each person would pay. So we'd need to know that rather than just throw out, it depends on the value of the unit. And I wanted to say, if you'd like any help, if you'd like me to help you, Alderman Jettie, I could take a city and, also help with that research. Oh, and there's one other thing. Alderman Lopez, you mentioned the New Hampshire constitutional requirements, and I hate to be in a position where I sound uninformed, but where would I find that kind of information? I mean, I know it would be in the New Hampshire RSAs, but what are you referring to when you made reference to something like that?
So actually, if you look at the city welfare guidelines, they quote the RSA for you because they basically say pursuant to blah, blah, blah. And that's a way of their signaling to participants in the program that this is why we're doing this, these are your rights. But just because they're telling people that doesn't mean that they're necessarily laying out a path for that person self-advocating or defining exactly what those are. I brought this up to Attorney Bolton. He has said that we meet the requirements as much as necessary. But if you want to find the RSAs that are relevant to city responsibilities for helping people who have no means of their own, that's where you would start.
Would you do that for us, Alderwoman Lowe? Would you
Sure.
speak with code and ask them for the RSAs? And
Sure.
so that-
It sounds to me like what Alderman Lopez said. Maybe I'd go to welfare, speak with Bob Mack. I mean, it seems like that would be the place to get that information or to get help with gathering it. Would you agree, Alderman Lopez?
Yeah, that's basically what Alderman Wilshire and I were doing 2 years ago when we looked at revising the welfare guidelines. Because I had raised these concerns in the Substandard Living Conditions Committee that we may be identifying people as ineligible in a way that wasn't necessarily accurate. Somebody didn't go to a case management appointment last year, that doesn't mean that their children deserve to be homeless this year because the city abdicates its responsibility. So that was behind that effort to try to do it. Bob Mack can tell you the results of that, but my impression of it was that he and the group that was involved expanded it to all of the other local welfare directors, had a series of meetings that became increasingly less accessible, and then didn't make changes. If there were changes, I'm not aware of what they are, but that's where I'm getting this from. It was an effort in the past to make sure that we were providing accountability and transparency, but then I don't think we did. It never made it back to the committee before the committee changed hands and we all switched our terms and all that kind of stuff. So
yes, I can gather that information for the group.
Super, that would be great. Alderman Lopez, as far as getting this started, I mean, it would be very nice if we went ahead and just, we'll collect money for the licenses and fees, but we'd need some funding to get it started. Do you know where funding like this would come from?
So this is tricky this year, particularly because I'm pretty sure the mayor is trying to shrink departments in order to keep the tax rate from
So
going crazy.
yeah, it's got to come from
may not be like,
someplace.
oh, good, you've asked me to do more. So that is going to be a challenge, but the very least we can do is identify what other cities do and kind of look at a goal. I don't think just because we can't do something this year, we should avoid ever doing it. And I think that's something that's going to be very important for us to remember with the budget is some of the things that we're going to have to look at very carefully this year. There's nothing stopping us from doing them in future years. So we may need to make strategic planning decisions. And that may be part of where a committee spawns from this one, where we say, this is our intention, and we need to figure out what exactly that would look like. In order to figure out what kind of funding sources we could identify and all that, we also need to figure out the scope of funding we would need. Like, are we looking at inspecting every single unit, or are we looking at having everybody pay a license and then expecting X number of units? That may be a decision where we want a wider community input in. There is a program called Nashville Listens, which the library started just before COVID. The worst time to come up with like let's get everybody into a room and start having conversations. But this is definitely a conversation that they could be managing for us. There's also I think Alderman Schmidt also attended one of their presentations. There's a group of faith and community leaders that are trying to focus on access to affordable housing in Nashua. And there's also a Granite State Organizing Project. And I suspect that those are places that might be able to help us figure out the need to meet the policy that Alderman Jetty identifies and the obligation that Alderman Liu might find.
Complex issue, and you're right. We shouldn't stop just because we know that we don't have the funds this year to hire somebody to get this started. I'm just wondering if there isn't some federal funding or through HUD or somewhere, especially with all the money that's coming into the state through the COVID relief and the American Rescue Plan. And if there isn't something that would help us with dealing with the issue of apartments, it's a huge, huge issue. It's not just housing that's got bed bugs. It's also that there isn't any housing and that it is so expensive. I'm just wondering if this can be part of something bigger in the long run, rather than just, can we charge somebody for, $5 a year for their license to have an apartment? Maybe it could be something bigger. So instead of just thinking the small, let's think about next year and let's think about where we could take it, what this could grow into. Maybe that inspector would have a much larger job than just going into apartments to make sure that there's no mold in the kitchen ceiling. Something for the future. Yeah.
For my 2 cents, I will say, with respect to the state representatives here, I would be hesitant to put anything solely on them because they change personalities every 2 years. And when it comes to the federal government, they don't change until something is way after the fact. Like they were showing up in year 5 of the opioid crisis. Like, let's think about getting you guys some funding. So that's why I always say, like, whatever we can do locally first would be good. But I think there are probably partners here, and I wouldn't mind doing research and trying to find out what those contributions are. And I know we have city staff who probably could be very helpful in that too. But I think for the sustainability of it, that's where we probably are going to have to look to ourselves and figure out what Nashua needs and how to maintain it at a Nashua specific level. HUD plays Hunger Games with the nonprofits dealing with the hungry. They make them compete for the prize. And they hide it in a very, very elaborate application system, which encourages strategic statistical measures and cooperations and having certain committee members and whatever. And I think in a perfect utopia, all of that would be very helpful guidance and teachable strategies, but it really turns into people having to compete against each other for who's going to get resources.
Yeah, you see it up in the state. Right now we're doing the budget and we're watching different departments, different organizations, nonprofit organizations that are begging, please put me back on, please, fund me completely. And even when you fund them completely, it isn't enough and it's wrong. We shouldn't set organizations against each other that are all necessary. But for here and right now, let's take each step as we can and see how we can make this grow into something good. Alderwoman Liu, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yes, I did. I didn't think I had my hand up. I just wanted to offer a thought that when I visit another community, one thing that I thought was really interesting is they have a display, and the display, it's artistic, and it talks about human rights. Maybe it's more common than I realized. I had never seen this before, but it's all the way around the square. It tells what has been decided that are human rights internationally. And just reading that, I just thought it was neat and helpful for anyone to know that these are generally agreed upon human rights. And, large organizations have established that and worked that out and are committed to that. And so it makes me wonder if so when Alderman Lopez spoke a lot about what is going on, although when you first started talking tonight, you alluded to, there are things that are still haven't improved. I'm not aware of what you know, but I think that when we get all of our information together, maybe we could have some sort of an education piece somewhere around the city, just to inform, just as an education, a billboard or something like that, to put that word out there that these are expectations that you can have when you rent a place in Nashua. And you will be supported if you need help getting that quality.
And who to reach and how to reach them.
Mm.
Yes.
Mm.
So there is a tenant's bill of rights that Alderman Clemens wrote, and we had talked about trying to add amendments to it and modify it, but that's supposed to be every time there is a rental agreement in Nashua, somebody gets a copy of that. There's also a good neighbor agreement, and I'm not exactly, I should probably find out to what extent that has an impact and whether there's any support behind it. But I think the most addition amendment that Alderman Clemens and I had talked about when he returned to office was just having landlords write down on paper whether or not parking was available. Like, you're renting an apartment and there's no obligation to actually say like, oh yeah, by the way, there's no parking. So then they rent, and then we as aldermen are supposed to manifest parking spaces because a landlord made decisions about how they're using their property, and that obviously gets awkward. So there, Alderman Lou, you're right. There isn't really a 10 commandments of what landlords should do, and there isn't a bill of rights with regards to tenants that's anywhere near up to date. But I think we could look at that, what Alderman Clemens has already implemented, and maybe have that as a discussion point for our next meeting, and maybe invite him to come and talk about areas that he thinks we can do better with too.
Excellent. Excellent. Have we pretty much covered what we were not even expecting to do? This is tremendous. I was expecting everyone to say, we can't do anything more. Let's call it quits and it's over. But I think we've got a goal here, and it may not happen tomorrow, but it's certainly going to happen sometime if we have anything to do with it. We all have our assignments. Oh, gee, what shall I do?
Get Alderman Clemens and his constitution.
We'll get Alderman Clemens in here next month.
You're the chair.
If
You're the
it's
one who
okay with
tells us to
everybody,
do
we
that.
will have.
I think you have your work cut out for in the legislature. So you just,
Yeah.
Oh, it's a busy time.
Yeah,
It's
if
just
you could make
very.
it so people could actually fight their eviction within 50 miles of their eviction.
I'll put in the bill again.
Yeah.
I'll put in the bill again, and we'll see if we can't just get enough people up there to help us understand that it's not just about landlords. It's about families. It's about community. It's about safety.
Because that case that I brought up it was obvious to me because it was so close to the court. But
Yeah.
I've really I've seen experiences where people are renting from somebody who lives in Florida, and the person evicts them, and like, Florida never had anything to do with that relationship or whatever, but that's where they get seen. It just doesn't make sense.
Well, I'll tell you what, when it comes before the committee, Alderman Lopez will come up and he will speak eloquently and at length to let people know how important this is and how we can make lives better.
It's a state house too, so I'll bring puppets.
There you Oh, they'll love you. They will absolutely love you. Anything else before we close tonight?
I never got any update on what was going on with the tax incentives for struggling landlords following COVID-19.
Yes.
That was the thing with Treasurer Fredette. Can we look at that?
There's actually the landlords themselves have to do this, and it's they simply have to call the state and get the data, and it has to be someone who earns less than $20,000. It's only for very small landlords. for anybody who has a question about anything like this, 211 is the call to make.
Okay.
Hmm.
I was
Every
gonna say, like,
time.
we really need to have somebody do a presentation because somebody watching this is gonna be like, call the state. How do I call the state? What does that mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, 211 is a good start. And then, I mean, if we could, I saw the article in the Union Leader, I think it was. But it would be good to have somebody like New Hampshire Legal Assistance or some group that knows these different features come and present, because we've talked, I am particularly traditionally on the side of the people who are living in the substandard living conditions, but I also recognize that there's the landlord's side and component.
Yep.
And I think while we do need to look at managing and accountability in the city, we can also look at resources and support as well.
Perfectly good idea. I'll ask anyone from legal assistance to come to visit us next month, and we'll do that first before we discuss anything else. Anything else tonight? Remarks by the alderman? I think we've remarked quite a bit.
No,
Oh, here we
I'm
go.
clean enough.
Alderman Lopez.
I just wanted to announce tomorrow is Free Cookie Day at Crumble. So CRUMBL. You can find them on Facebook. They're brand new to the Nashville area. They had their ribbon cutting yesterday. So their opening gambit is to give out cookies, which I think is a power move. And then additionally, we're working on a number of murals in the French Le Parc de Notre Renaissance Française. I know Alderman Jetty's going to call me out on it. So I just want people to be aware of that so that nobody thinks we're destroying murals. We're updating them. We're renovating them. We're renewing them.
What was
and
the
then,
website? What was the website again? So that people can
in-
go see what you're.
Involved2impact.org. That's
Yes,
involved
thank you.
impact.org. And one of our VIPs on the wall was nominated by the Richelieu Club is Mayor Lozo. So some familiar faces. And then also the Tree Streets Block Party will be June 26th. You can go to the same website actually, because I happen to be doing both of them. And if you're interested in sponsoring a futsal team or donating so that we can give ice cream to kids or anything like that, then check it out.
Thanks very much. Anything else, folks?
I think you skipped over public comment. I don't know.
Oh,
that
I'm
any-
sorry. Yeah, actually, there's nobody here. We've got
Jeff
Jeff
wants to
from
say something.
CTV.
He's public.
Yes, no, there is no public comment because there's no public tonight. And we do not need a non-public session. So I guess I would
Was not.
call on call on Alderman Jetty for a motion.
I make a motion that we adjourn by roll call.
Okay, go ahead and do a roll call for us.
Alderman Schmidt,
Yes.
Alderman Jetty votes yes. Alderman Lopez,
Yes.
Alderman Lou,
Yes.
and
That's all three of
Alderman
us.
Cleaver joined us. So it's 4 yeas and 0 nays.
And the time we are ending is 8:11. And this was tremendous. This is a 1,000 times more than I expected we would get tonight.
I agree.
Go ahead.
I agree.
Yes. So we'll meet here again in a month, and we'll see what we can get accomplished.
This is the second time in a row I've seen a chair give us action items, by the way, which I appreciate, because having like a solid point of direction when we leave is always helpful.
Well, it means we'll get something done next time, which is really important too.
Yeah, that'd be great. I think a lot
Thanks,
of people would
everybody.
appreciate that.
You guys have been awesome. Thank you so much.
So
And,
before you go, when you say next month, what date are you
Mm.
thinking about? Because we got the budget review committee's got a whole bunch of meetings.
Yeah, they tuck us in. They made sure that I'll make sure we'll get it. I'll make sure everybody knows about it. Okay.
Like
Okay.
third Thursday, isn't it? Typically?
It's usually Thursday. Who knows with the budget committee? They may have moved us, but I'll make sure we know before too long. Maybe this week I'll find out. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
You
Thank you.
bet.
Good night.
Super. It was good to
Good
see you all.
Good to
Bye-bye.
see
Do the meeting right after code enforcement tells how much money.